One of the awkward things about being put up on a pedestal at the onset here is I'm going to swiftly kick the pedestal out and humanize myself. I had an interesting predicament on my way here. All right. I am really worried that my stomach is going to be rumbling all throughout this presentation, but this came from a series of events that happens inside of an OCD-affected mind. You see, I have this delicious dinner opportunity of ground chicken meatballs stuffed with spinach, and when I worried that my stomach would be rumbling, I worried more that I would get spinach in my teeth, and then I would stand in front of an audience, and that's all you would see. And my vanity took over, and so now I am hungry, but my pearly whites are intact, and so that's what goes on inside my brain. But I do want to start with an actual story, one that hopefully kind of brings us into the depths of what unwellness looks like. And that's the year 2016 in my life was a huge turning point, a giant pivot in a whole variety of ways. We started January with my father-in-law taking ill, and in the course of about 8 weeks, he passed away. And I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this with judgment, but his illness and resulting death was the consequence or a culmination of consequences from a lifestyle that just didn't promote wellness or focus on wellness. And so we watched up close him kind of just be demoralized and lose his fight for his life due to some heart failure things. And I remember my husband turning to me and saying, I just can't lose my mom. That was so devastating. And his mom was his best friend. And then 6 weeks later, we got a terminal diagnosis for her. And so in March of 2016, she was diagnosed with lung cancer, but it had metastasized on her brain. So in April, we had a tumor removal. In May, we went through chemotherapy with her. In June and July, there was radiation. In August, she was put on hospice, and in September, she passed away. Now, in that same season, my husband and I were probably in the most radical, unhealthy place in our own personal lives. Our physical health was a disaster. Our financial health was a disaster. Pretty much any place you can think of there being breakdown in someone's life, our emotional wellness was a problem. Our relational wellness was a problem. It was kind of this despondent, just terrible space to be in. And I remember going to work and saying to a friend, if God would just tell me what he wants me to learn here, I promise I'll learn it. It doesn't have to be this hard. Turns out I'm actually more stubborn than I thought, and it probably did have to be that hard. But in that season, what happened was I started to shift my understanding of what being well and unwell actually looked like. And one of the scariest things was I looked at myself in the mirror and realized how unwell I actually was. So I was taking a lot of time I was in my master's program for counseling. I was working full-time. I was tending to sickness. I was helping coordinate the household, and I was giving it everything I had. But I was just going in a whole host of directions in a really kind of neurotic way. And it was just really a trying season. And it was one of those times where I was helping hoist my mother-in-law kind of into bed or into the bathroom, or, one of the cool things we did get to do with her that was incredible was on her bucket list, she decided she wanted to be pulled by a horse-drawn carriage. And so a week before she passed away, and her body was so ravaged and so frail, we were actually able to hoist her into a carriage that came to our house. And each of her sons were able to go with her kind of around the block. And in those moments of caring for her broken body, I realized how selfish some of my personal behaviors were, because all I could think of is if someone has to care for me this way, I am making it significantly harder on them because of how destructive my choices are. My physical health was so out of control. Once upon a time, I did weigh about twice as much as I do right now. And that was my normal because I grew up in a context where that was normalized, where things like addiction was normalized, where things like emotional unhealth was normalized. I didn't know differently. But in those moments, I understood that if I didn't radically alter the course of my life, and I don't say that of my own strength, but that awareness was someone will have to care for me someday, and that's one of the most unloving things I could put on someone. And so that was a launching point for change. And so one of the first things I did was engage in a physical overhaul. And I lived in 2016 where there was a lot of medical intervention, and so I'm not ashamed that part of my story was seeking out medical resources to support that part of my journey. And then I was in seminary at the time, and I'm taking coursework for emotional mental health, and I get to sit shoulder to shoulder with a lot of people that modeled wellness for me. And so that started to help me understand differently what it looks like to be emotionally well. And then we had a series of events that brought me alongside of people who could help me, coach me, teach me how to be more financially well and how to be more relationally well. And I can't tell you that, since 2016, my life has just become excellent. What I can say is I know how to navigate those really terrible places a little bit better now because my emphasis has changed. And that's the emphasis I want to share with you guys. There is not a chance I can read that screen. So I'm going to pull it up on my phone here, and hopefully it matches what's up there. And also, just a moment. Whew. Hydration is part of physical wellness, so, something to consider. Instead of talking about mental health, I think I want to shift the conversation to what does it mean to live well? And not just in the mental health space, but if we expand it out and we decide that we want to emphasize living well in all of the wellness domains, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, your mental health will significantly improve. Because living well is the number one buffer towards disease. And one of those types of diseases is mental health struggle. And so we're going to talk about just a variety of inputs that might be helpful for someone who decides they want to live well. So I feel like in our Western culture, we say things like, well, I'm not sick, so I'm fine. And while that might be true, I didn't think I was sick in 2016, but I know for sure I wasn't well. I wasn't healthy. And health is the consistent input of healthful things going on in our life. It's not just the absence of disease. If you wait until your body starts to break down with disease, you've waited too long. If you wait till your finances have corroded and they're almost in a space where you're not going to recover well, you've waited too long. Proactivity is the number one tool we have to promote health and wellness in our lives, and that's what I really want to talk to you about today. So we're going to talk about some concerns for our youth. Why is it important to talk to this particular age group? Well, this is the number one age group as it relates to anxiety and depression. That's just the reality. Any guesses or any hypotheses on why that's true? You guys are like, that's not true, I'm fine. Yeah? Go ahead. Exactly right. As I go through these health domains and these wellness domains, what you're going to notice is that as you're being called into adulthood, you're being called to make so many decisions, one after another, that's supposed to transition you from being dependent to independent. Someone making decisions for you to you being forced to make decisions for yourself. That's a terrifying space to live in. But that's the space you're called to live in as you go into, I was going to say middle school, that's not right. As you go into college and beyond. I hang out with the little kids all day. It's a thing. Concern for our youth also happens because you guys don't have a host of resources at your disposal yet. You're still building the arsenal of what you need to be successful. So you're building finances. If you're going to college, you're building some intelligence. If you're in the workplace, you're building skills, practical that you can practically apply throughout your life. If you're attending church, you're building up your spiritual resources. There's a whole host of things going on. But there's so many areas that need your attention, and as you're creating an infrastructure of your life, you have to realize that there are just big, giant gaps that you're going to have to fill. Some of us come into our young adulthood with parents or mentors or leaders that have paved really cool ways for us. And then some of us come with these giant gaps where it just seems impossible to fill them. And so what I want to do today is not only normalize the anxiety that comes with that and the struggles that come with that, but my sole mission I'm kidding, I have a ton of missions. One of my soul missions is to normalize asking for help. Because we're not supposed to have all the answers. That is ludicrous to think that we're supposed to go through life independently. We are called to be in community. We are called to be sharpened by one another, and we have to ask for help. And so one of my goals is to normalize with people the importance of saying, hey, I actually need some support here. And when I finally started to ask for help in my life, the amount of people that have stepped in and helped refine me, it's been staggering and astounding. And I get to stand here 6 years into a journey of health, and Lord willing, that goes on for decades, and I get to stand on the shoulders of other people who came along and said, Steph, you're not supposed to have the answers. Here's something else for you to consider. Here's another way for you to stretch and grow. But asking for help has to be one of those primary things that we're willing to do. One of the things, too, is we just talk from a basic biological developmental standpoint. Some of y'all's brains got a lot of work to do yet. Yeah, well, and some of you have certain people in mind, you're like, yeah, they got to get it. But the reality is, neurodevelopment says you still have until about age 25 where your brain is still in the process of growing infrastructure. That's just the hardwire. So you're already less resourced when you look at your adult counterparts and you're like, well, I want to be where they're at, or I want to achieve those types of things. You've got to build the infrastructure of the brain yet. You've got to build all the resources. And then the lack of experience with conflict is one of the things to consider. If you haven't been allowed to argue, if you haven't been allowed to struggle through things, if you haven't been allowed to engage conflict, how would you know how to do it well? Right? And so you have to go through the growing pains of trying new things. If you had to guess, so I put up there that COVID anxiety rates among kind of the most at-risk population, so people in their like 60s and 70s and 80s, they reported significantly lower prevalence of anxiety and depression during the kind of early onset of COVID compared to our counterparts who were in their middle school, high school, and young adult years. What might account for that? You answered the first question. I'm totally looking to you if no one else. Maybe social media could have some sort of influence.
They didn't have the resources and the experience the older generation had already gone through trials.
Exactly right. So we have people that say, you know what, I went through World War II, or I went through the raucous 60s, or I went through Vietnam, or I went through Operation Desert Storm, or I went through September 11. They have a frame of reference that as you go into crisis resolves over time and you come out and you're refined by it. But young adults don't have that perspective yet unless you've been invited into really hard spaces already. But a lot of us haven't been. And so when you start getting into a pandemic and it goes on for 5 weeks and then 10 weeks and then 6 months and then a year, that feels absolutely unending, right? And you don't have a frame of reference for things like grit and perseverance, and it might be different, but we will get through it. So the despondency can grow just because we don't have a frame of reference for things coming to an end or coming to completion. We also have a lot of social norms that compete for your attention. Things like cancel culture, that's a direct response to, I can't stand discomfort, so you have to be quiet. We have literally told you guys that you don't have to tolerate distress. That's not even biblical. You literally have to learn to grow in love and tolerance of people who compete with your narrative. We're called to that. But culturally, we've said somehow that, if you're uncomfortable, we got to sit down and be quiet. And so then you don't learn how to engage conflict, and that's a problem. We also have cultural norms that really prioritize things like instant gratification. We're constantly told to eat, drink, and be merry, get all of the things, do all of the things, have fun. And I think your age group is going to be one of the most highly targeted with things like advertising. It's just going to organically happen. And if you want to be well, you're going to have to say, you know what? I need to learn to tolerate distress. I need to learn to not seek out instant gratification. I have to learn about patience and perseverance and tolerating suffering. But if we look around our culture, addiction is everywhere. If we look at any single type of addiction, whether it's something related to consuming, whether it's something related to, I'm thinking like food addiction. I'm thinking things like pornography. I'm thinking things like drugs and alcohol. All of these things are instant fixes so we don't have to deal with our distress. And you guys that's been normalized now for several generations at least. And many of you probably grew up in a home where those types of behaviors could have also been normalized. And if you decide you want to be well, you're going to have to systematically dismantle those types of things. And culturally, you're going to have to push back against that. The next thing that we run into is how parents have decided to help us avoid discomfort. I think our parents do the best they can. I think that almost across the board. There are a few malicious folk out there. In general, parents do absolutely everything they can. And parents sometimes create wounds or help create gaps or contribute to hard things. Okay? I'm really running out of, give me a second here. I do talk for a living, but I'll tell you, I'm starting to do like 5 hours on Tuesday nights, and I go home and crash. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But parents, to be like, I think they do a great job, but I think what happens is we go through a reaction cycle with parenting. And so we have parents in the 1950s, pretty authoritarian, pretty intense. Kids are to be seen and not heard. And then we go to kind of the love and peace and, I don't know, what do they call the 70s? It was a whole thing, right? Like the 70s were pretty interesting. And then the kids of the 70s were like, ooh, that felt a little loosey-goosey. Let's go back to the authoritarian sanctions. And so by the time we get to the 90s, we have a lot of rigid structures in place again. And now we kind of vacillate back. And I think something that our parents did was they said, ooh, if I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, that was a little rigid, that was a little oppressive. And so one of the responses has been, I don't like kids experiencing pain. I don't like kids who go through hard things, so I'm going to protect my kids from everything. And unfortunately, parents who protect us from everything also immobilize us when it comes to being advocates in our own life. So we come to times where we're supposed to make decisions and we have no frame of reference for decision making because parents have, not imposed, that sounds rude, parents have generously stepped into our stories and protected us from things, even the laws of natural consequences, where we don't have to answer for our actions. And that's one of the pieces that refines us. And so we have some gaps that show up because parents are great intentioned, but possibly have accidentally overprotected. We also have the whole kind of being aversive to engaging conflict anyway, right? How many of you voluntarily engage conflict? There's a few of you in here, don't lie. Yeah, but right? He's like, I'll throw down. I wouldn't actually know how to throw down if someone challenged me. I wouldn't even know what that would look like. Be like, we could have a word battle, but what we run into, though, is just the understanding that we aren't taught how to engage conflict. We are taught how to yell at one another. We're taught how to speak over one another. Some of us are taught really well through getting the silent treatment if we've disappointed someone. But we don't teach people how to engage conflict. Conflict is actually conversation. If you are willing to keep it civil and if you are willing to kind of sit in the grime with someone and hash it out. It's something we can do, but it's a real skill that has kind of fallen by the wayside or it's not very trendy. We can bring it back, right? And that's something we have to grow in. How many of us have quit jobs because someone gave us some sort of criticism? Instead of seeing that as opportunity for growth or as seeing that for some sort of chance to, okay, if I didn't do it well, I'm going to try differently next time and I'm going to try harder. But we're so conflict aversive, and I'm saying that as a generalization, and I'm saying that as an overgeneralization. I warned you, my brain is OCD affected, so I do overgeneralize. There are some of you that probably engage conflict well. But by and large, it's a pretty lost art. It's not something that we're good at societally. The last thing up there that it talks about is that how many of us know when we are wounded emotionally how to walk towards healing? Probably not a lot of us. Probably not a lot of us are actually able to identify that we have emotional wounding that's happened. Probably some of us are kind of confused, like, what's an emotion? No, I learned what it was around 2016, I'm not gonna lie. It's a whole thing, but I know it now, so it's good. And that's what I wanna normalize too, just growth. Growth is important, right? But the whole kind of concept that we have to wrestle with is, if I am wounded somehow, what is my responsibility? What is my responsibility biblically? What is my responsibility relationally? What is my responsibility in relation to what values I want to be true about my life, in relationship to the type of person that I want to be in my life? We have a lot of responsibility as it comes to engaging conflict, and as it comes to engaging hurts, and as it comes to engaging healing. But one of the things to talk about is, if those are not skills that you have yet, there's a very specific process. It's up there on the graphic. The first step in any new shift in our life is going to be fear. So we have to normalize that it's profoundly uncomfortable to do all of the things I'm about to tell you to go out and do, okay? Because if it's not something that someone's led us towards and led us through, you're not going to have much of a frame of reference for it, and you might get it wrong on occasion, and it might be somewhat uncomfortable. I could tell you about when I went skiing last week for the first time and how that was awful. They had to pull me out of a tree at one point. And I didn't make that up. But what happened the entire time was just my body was flooded with stress hormone and flooded with stress hormone and flooded with stress hormone. But every pass I went down, it got a little bit less, a little bit less. I hit the tree, it went up, but then it got a little bit less. And I bet you if I hit the tree a second time, I would have been a little bit better the second time, because I would have had practice hitting trees before. I'm just saying, the more you do it, the better you'll get. And so you have to trust that the process of growth involves fear, but beyond fear, that's where the growth happens. So let's talk about what it looks like to actually step towards wellness. Yes, there we go. I think I'm gonna put my back kind of rudely to you guys, because I'm trying to do it with the phone and it's not working really well. The word I chose for the path towards wellness, and notice I'm not saying health, I'm saying wellness, because I do believe in just kind of whole person wellness, means the inputs that lead us towards being well. The whole journey is arduous. So read that definition. It's involving or requiring strenuous effort. It's difficult, it's tiring, but I want to convince you that it's worth it. Because it's a journey, and a journey takes us from one place to another. And my goal is to take us I'm not accusing you of being in unhealth. If you are, there's hope for you, I promise. If you're in complacency, that's what I want to light a fire under as well. Because complacency in the absence of disease does not mean you're well. It does not mean you're healthy. And I want us to create communities of wellness warriors, so that when our kids grow up, they understand what it looks like, because they've had living witnesses in their homes guide them towards wellness. That's how we learn. We learn from our parents, and if we didn't get it from them, I think we have a responsibility to do it better for the next generation. And the thing we have to acknowledge is we all have a different starting line. So some things that might come easy for me, and we'll talk about the wellness domains in a minute, but some things that might come easy for me might be more difficult for you. I know that I'm someone that's categorically going to have to fight harder for physical health for my entire life, because of my history, because of my family context, because of my genetics, because of my struggles with OCD. It's something that's a part of my story, and I'm going to have to fight harder than some of you will. But then I'm not going to have to fight as hard, let's say, with interpersonal wellness and connection and community, because I'm a charmer. But no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, I've just had a lot of practice with this particular area, so it's going to organically come easier for me. We have to be so careful about the benchmark of our success being comparing to other people. The benchmark of our success is today I did my best and tomorrow I will do better because I'm going to continually walk towards being a better version of myself.
So good.
Thank you. Thank you. The next slide breaks down why it's such a journey. And I am excited, pie in the sky. I thought about pie. Okay. I have a book that I am working on, and a lot of these tenets are in the book. And if all goes well, I should have the written portion done by the end of March. And so, and then I have no idea what's next. I think there's like editors and publishers involved, but I really haven't looked that far. But that is a thing that I think is important. This is the piece I'm really going to focus on, the different areas of what it looks like to actually be well. Now, there are plenty of people that might modify this list. There's plenty of things you could add to this list. But these are kind of the 8 core areas that I would love for us to use as a launching point. So when we talk about wellness, we're talking about things like physical health and intellectual health, emotional health, and spiritual health. Those are all personal things. Those are all related to me, myself, how I grow and develop. And then we go outward and we look at things like vocational health. What am I doing in my calling, in my workplace, on my path towards my calling? That's going to be a place where we can exercise wellness. Financial health. That's going to be another area that we've been intentionally called to cultivate and to establish habits that are healthful. When we look at environmental health, what am I doing in my surroundings? Who am I surrounded by? What inputs do I allow? What am I consuming, not just with my body, but with my mind? What am I doing spiritually to help cultivate myself? It's all interconnected. And then the last one, recreational health. I think we've really, in our culture, we've glamorized being a workaholic. I know I have found that to be very trendy. Mm-hmm. I actually excel at that one. For now, I'm trying to work on being better there. But recreational health is paramount. Finding things that you enjoy, finding things that are life-giving, finding things that connect you in community, those are paramount for balanced wellness. And so it's one of those things where we think through in all of these areas, what am I doing to move the mark towards health or towards wellness? You can start in any one of these areas. And what I want to encourage you to think about is every choice you make that moves you towards health is a vote for whole person wellness. There's no way to tackle it all at once. And like I said, it's been about 6 years. I've worked very, very hard on the physical health. I have been working on intellectual health for probably the broad side of about a decade and a half at this point. Emotional health, yikes. Therapy every week for, the last year. Therapy preceding that as well. Should have been in therapy preceding that as well. But emotional health is a big deal. And one of the things that emotional health entails is learning to surround yourself well with people who model and influence the behaviors that you want. And that's been something that's been a part of my life for quite a while here. I'm surrounded by absolute wellness warriors. And it makes my heart happy, and I experience so much relief understanding that if I flail, I have people around me who will hold me up when I struggle. And so that relational piece is so important. The emotional piece is important. The spiritual health, here's where the book might get a little dicey. I'm going to push back against hyper-spirituality because we come with this posture of imbalance that says not all of it matters. Maybe just this one thing matters, or this one or two things matter. And I'm sorry, but when we are told to walk the walk, we are told to steward our resources well. We are told to take our talents and multiply them. It is not a single venue we're supposed to travel down. We're supposed to consider it all. And if we take one of these or two of these and we elevate it and say, that's what's important, I worry that some of us don't have the opportunity to witness well if our strengths fall outside of that. And all of our strengths matter. It's the collective strength that's going to help cultivate health and wellness. We can go to the next slide. So the journey towards health is interconnected. And I want to highlight just a couple stories here. One to consider is when there's a breakdown in one area, we tend to see a ripple effect. And so I pulled the passage from Psalm 32, and there's 4 Psalms to choose from when David makes some questionable relational choices with Bathsheba, and he experiences a whole host of consequences for that decision. And so it says, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. So I experienced physical breakdown. I was physically incapable of staying in a healthy space. Through my groanings all day long, so we assume there's emotional anguish going on, for day and night, so now we have disrupted sleep, we have physical health still affected. Your hand was heavy on me, so I'm feeling the spiritual torment, and that's also being affected here. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. We know that in the process of the affair that he also experiences relational breakdown. He also, thankfully, is surrounded by wise and godly people. And Nathan's able to come to him and use an analogy. And David gives the right verdict. And then Nathan's able to say, but you're the person. You're the man. Godly, wise counsel surrounding us is what we need if we expect to be well. But when there's breakdown that starts, it has a ripple effect. So if I decide to be financially indulgent and I decide to kind of fritter away my resources there's probably going to be some emotional distress that happens because of that, because my resources are limited. There's probably going to be some relational consequence because maybe I've taken some of the resources that should have been used as community property or shared property. There could be some spiritual breakdown going on there because now I'm doubting or I'm questioning or I'm challenging God or asking him like, hey, why is this happening to me? There's a ripple effect that happens. But the beauty is, if a ripple effect happens with unhealth, what does that mean about a ripple effect with health? When you start to reorganize and redistribute your energy and you start to focus on wellness, there's unintentional consequences in a good way where things start to evolve towards a healthy outcome because you're consistently putting in things that are helpful and healthful. And that's the goal, is to not understand health as a destination, but to understand health and wellness as a journey and a lifelong commitment to all of these things matter, and I'm going to continue walking boldly towards wellness, understanding I'm never going to arrive. But if and when the hard stuff happens, I will be better equipped and better prepared and can witness better because I've taken some proactive measures to invite wellness into my life. And none of this is a guarantee. Life is uncertain. But what I know is that when I face challenges today, I can witness so much better than when I faced challenges in 2016. I know that for certain. And so I know that it is so worth it to fight for different outcomes because it's going to equip us whatever's going on in front of us. And there's no certainty there, but I know with certainty, if I was unwell the way I once was, that most battles that come my way, I would be ill-equipped for. The one thing that I want to make sure that we invite you into understanding is every one of you is invited to change, and for every one of us, it's possible. Currently, where I work at Joe Martino Counseling, and that's our whole mantra: change, period, possible. I still haven't asked him about the, distinct words, but what I know is that I've never sat with a client and thought, oh, too late for them. Not once. I mean, I wouldn't say it to their face. No, I've never once thought that. It's an interesting thing, actually. One of the coolest things about therapy is you just fall in love with people. It doesn't matter the story. You fall in love with humans when you get to be that close with them. It's just the coolest thing. But one of the things that, like I've already said, it's not about the absence of sickness. It's about the presence of healthy inputs. And I want to encourage you to consider, what does it look like to have a spirit of curiosity? One of the adages I had heard several years ago that I loved, it said, there are people who know everything and there are people who are curious. I don't have conversations with people who know everything. because there's nothing that I'm going to walk away with and feel as though we've added value to one another's lives. Adopt a spirit of curiosity, and it is insanely cool what can happen with that. Take change slowly. I'm in my mid-30s. I don't know how much time I get to have, but I do know I want to be engaged in wellness my entire lifespan. There is no reason to sprint. I'll run out of energy really quickly, no doubt. But here's the thing, it's going to be slow, gradual, incremental shifts. And over time, you'll notice the accrued resources that you have takes you on a far different trajectory than you could have imagined for yourself once upon a time. Because you commit to the process of change, and it's an incredible thing to commit to. We have to revise the metrics. It cannot be about the outcomes. It cannot be about the destination. Or once you get there, you're going to think, okay, good to go. That can't be a thing. It's consistently walking towards some type of new health endeavor in any of those domains, in any of those areas. But the goal is to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. And one of the beautiful things about understanding what that looks like is there's always going to be someone on the path in front of us. And Lord willing, there's always someone on the path behind us, and we can offer them a hand and we can invite them into change as well. Because it's about us helping each other. That's what the whole process is going to circle around. We have to entrust others to help. This is the piece that I talk through in every one of the psychology classes that I teach. When we talk about distress, we're talking about what we call appraisal theory. We're talking about my sense of risk is directly tied into my sense of resources. The more resources that are built into my life, the less perception of risk I will have. And one of the stories I use to illustrate that is Job. Think of Job when he had friends and he had family. He had a wife who supported him. He had houses. He had servants. He had cattle. And then systematically they got crossed off his list, crossed off his list, crossed off his list. And then he understood risk in a far different way. And he understood despair in a far different way. The more resources we have, the lower our perception of risk. And there's the saying that says, God gives you the shovel, but you have to dig the hole, right? That's one of the things to understand is we have a responsibility to accrue our resources. No one can do that for us. We have to be the ones that proactively seek out resources that are going to support us and support our health and wellness. It makes much more sense to take a drink as I'm waiting for the slide to transition. I just realized that would have been a smart process all the way through here. All right, to wrap it up, my goal is to invite you to think of what resources might help me. I'm a young adult. I'm transitioning into adulthood. I'm transitioning into a space where I'm going to have to take care of myself physically. I'm going to be entrusted with my intellectual wellness. I'm going to be responsible for my spiritual growth and cultivation. I'm going to be invited into handling my own finances. I'm going to have to make career decisions. I'm going to have to worry about my relationships, and I'm going to have to tend to my environments. Those are all things entrusted to you. Take it seriously and start to make small incremental shifts towards what you want to be true about your life. I have a client who just came out of an excruciating season, and she said to me the other day, she said, I know I want to do stuff, but I don't know how to get started. And I said, here's what I know. I said, I know that if you look at yourself 2 years down the road, you probably have a pretty good idea of what she looks like. And I said, tell me about her. And so she described her, and I said, okay, what do you need to do today to make that happen? You go and figure out what future you needs, and then you pick up the shovel and dig today. And you dig day after day, because we are given one life, we are given one opportunity, and we are commanded to take our gifts and talents and use them well and use them to His glory. But we're also invited to do that. And that is such a profound blessing if you understand how to invite wellness into your story and use it for His glory. Enlist helpers. Get people in front of you who inspire you. Get people in front of you who model wellness and walk towards that and walk towards them. Commit to health as a process. Stay humble and use your gifts to His glory. That's what we're commanded to do. That's what we're invited to do. And then ending with 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20 here, it says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." And I think we can say, and honor God with your talents, with your careers, with your finances, with your relationships. Honor him in all of that by living it out well.